Good evening. My name is Sean Healy, and I'm the Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy for iCivics, which is the leading provider of civic education in the country. I began this role in January, and it's a new role for me. Previously, I'd worked in Illinois at a foundation and had led policy efforts in civic education within the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago. So this new role is on a national stage as we work to advance policies across states and in Congress. And specifically, there's a federal bill called the Civic Secures Democracy Act that was introduced in Congress back in March, and I'm charged with leading both grasstops and grassroots mobilization behind that bill with the goal of getting it passed by the end of the current 117th Congress, which is January 2023. Doing this in a very fraught political environment. We are, as a country, more politically polarized, arguably, than we've been at any time since the Civil War. We have an evenly divided Congress, literally 50-50 in terms of partisan split in the Senate. Democrats have only a 5-seat majority in the House. And we're also facing a country that is deep in the midst of a culture war, but also a country where we have widespread civic ignorance. We have huge distrust, in fact, record-breaking distrust of our government institutions, our private institutions, and frankly, even one another. So the environment for this work is fraught, but it really underscores the need for stronger civic education, both at the state and at the federal level. For this Doing Power project, my objectives were twofold. One, to pass that legislation, the Civic Secures Democracy Act, by January 2023. Specifically, my objectives were to build relationships in Washington, D.C., a place where I hadn't previously done work. Very much is a company town. In fact, it's pretty common for the people that work there to remind newcomers like me how little I know and how little experience I have on that front. And I also wanted to demonstrate results from some of the grassroots outreach to members of Congress that I'm facilitating. My second objective was more on the state level. As my organization, we're seeking to do more lobbying, and as a nonprofit, we're quite limited on that front. So one of my objectives is actually to build a C4 wing to our C3, or C4 spinoff to our C3 status as an organization. And during this 8-week course, I was charged with drafting a strategic plan for that C4 to begin shopping that proposal among funders. We need to raise, we think, about $7.5 million over the course of 3 years to execute on this C4 strategy. And then specifically on the execution side, to build state strategies out in partnership with some of our state affiliates and allies on the ground. So what did I specifically do during the course of this course? Going back to the federal bill, the Civic Secures Democracy Act, I helped broker a compromise with our lead Senate sponsor on the Republican side. There have been all kinds of conservative concerns that had emerged on the bill since March, frankly put its fate very much in jeopardy. We worked with the Senate office in partnership with a conservative organization in their state to accept a number of so-called red lines or changes to the bill, negotiated those changes with the Republican office. They went back and talked to the other lead sponsors, both in the House and the Senate, representatives of both parties, and we're ready to reintroduce that bill in September and start shopping this around to other potential Republican supporters. I also designed a recess strategy. Congress is on vacation. Many of them are back in their states and districts, and we're seeking our grassroots supporters to reach out to them and build on co-sponsorship. A couple of other big things: lining up some key allies for the federal bill. One of them is former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, trying to find an event where we can feature her support for the bill. And we're also vetting a Republican-led policy shop that can really bring more power to our outreach to Republicans in both chambers. On the C4 side, I did draft and revised our strategic plan. We're doing a policy summit next month to highlight progress on both federal and state policy, and I certainly strengthened our agenda, added the governor of Oregon to the agenda, have a strong ask out to the governor of Arkansas, landed state education chiefs from Washington, Wyoming, and New York, have a bipartisan panel of state lawmakers ready to speak. Lots of other luminaries like Ken Burns, so really excited about that. And then finally, helped co-develop some state-specific strategies, specifically in the states of Wisconsin, Nebraska, and Georgia. In Nebraska, as an example, developed that strategy in partnership with a state senator there. I'll conclude with some thoughts about what I learned in this course. And one is to really lay out my career trajectory and to develop some benchmarks in order to achieve some of those goals. Previously, I had a job for 15 and a half years, a little bit listless in my career. I'm mid-career now, definitely have a few different directions I could go, and really thinking about what are some of the key benchmarks, frankly, to achieve any of those specific objectives or career directions. Second, being relentless in my attention to networking, particularly on the DC scene, to identify some mentors. I've already identified a couple of those in Washington and actively pursuing their mentorship. And frankly, learning that I shouldn't fear rejection in the ask, that people like to be asked, and often they respond in the affirmative when asked. To also be relentless in a third learning from the course in building my brand. To curate a lot of the media in which I've been featured. For example, was quoted extensively in a Washington Post article back in May, to make sure I curate that on a website and all the media that I've been featured in over the years, and also to produce my own media. I blogged extensively in the past about civic education in Illinois. Certainly need to start doing that on the national scene, and want to follow up on my course facilitator's suggestion that I actually develop a podcast and interview some of these key DC players on that podcast. Fourth, and finally, really was encouraged by my course facilitator to pay attention to how I project myself, particularly as I show up in a virtual space, which is, of course, quite ubiquitous for many, if not all of us, in the midst of this pandemic, and specifically to be a little less Midwestern humble, as my course facilitator said, less Clark Kent, more Superman. Hope that came through in today's video, and very appreciative of both Professor Pfeffer, my course facilitator, Michael Wenderoff, and all of my colleagues that took this course, took so much from this course. Look forward to implementing these recommendations and also coming back to this video and holding myself accountable to that. Thank you.